When you first open the 50501 protest guide, it doesn't look like a radical or militant manifesto. In fact, it presents itself like a community PSA, almost like it was written by a well-meaning volunteer at a neighborhood watch meeting. The section is titled Be Aware, and what follows sounds, at first glance, like common sense advice. But as we go deeper, a pattern starts to form, not just in the wording, but in what's carefully said and what's even more carefully implied. The very first line is first and foremost, keep the peace, in all caps. It's almost theatrical in its emphasis, and honestly, on its surface, that doesn't sound controversial at all. Most people would agree peace is preferable, but in the context of this guide, which we'll see more clearly as we go, it starts to feel less like a genuine call for peace and more like strategic optics, a brand. The appearance of peace as a shield against criticism and legal repercussions, while something much more organized simmers beneath. Next, it doubles down with this. Protect anyone and everyone from brutality, and no matter who. This line is dressed up in moral authority, invoking ideas of shared humanity, compassion, even virtue. But there's a subtle sleight of hand happening. Protect anyone and everyone from brutality could, in theory, include counter-protesters, police officers, or bystanders. But in practice, it sets up a slippery moral framework. They define what brutality is, and they decide who's a victim and who's a threat. And that part, the part where it shifts from a universal ideal to a subjective code of conduct, that's the first red flag. Then we get into strategy. It advises protesters to research the event beforehand, asking smart logistical questions. Is the group trustworthy? Do they have a safety plan? Are they communicating clearly? Are they coordinating with officials? What are the laws in your state? Will it be legal? This is where the peaceful appearance sharpens into something more deliberate. They're not just showing up with cardboard signs and chants. They're auditing the event like a mission briefing. This is operational planning, soft-gloved, but highly intentional. Then it takes a darker turn, wrapped in more cautionary language. Do not commit acts of violence, or else we risk martial law, and the initiation of mass incarcerations or worse. Notice what's missing here. There's no statement that violence is wrong morally. No ethics. Just consequences. This isn't a moral warning. It's a tactical one. Violence isn't rejected because it's evil. It's rejected because it's not strategically convenient. That's a crucial distinction. And the wording, or worse, is chillingly vague. Are they worried about martial law? Or fantasizing about it? Then the guide tells you to stop anyone else from committing acts of violence. On paper, this sounds like more peacekeeping. But again, think about the structure. This isn't de-escalation from both sides. It's internal policing. Protesters are told to suppress any violence from within, not out altruism, but to preserve the image and avoid crackdowns. And there's a glaring asterisk here. Do no harm, except in defense of life. That last part is so open-ended it could justify anything. If someone throws a bottle or breaks a window, could that be deemed a threat to life? It leaves the door wide open for reinterpreting aggression as self-defense. And then comes the paranoid logic. If you suspect someone is an instigator, gather evidence and alert an organizer. Again, not avoid them, not keep a distance. No, gather evidence. This is the language of surveillance, of infiltration. It presumes there will be planted agitators, which primes every participant to watch the others. That kind of environment doesn't build trust. It builds suspicion, chaos, and internal division. And all of this is being done under the banner of peace. Finally, it closes with strangely manufactured positivity. Try to keep the mood upbeat to boost morale, maintain calm, and exemplify solidarity and integrity. Peace. All caps again. The way this is framed feels almost like emotional management, as if protests are being run like performance pieces. Keep smiling. Keep the vibe high. Keep the cameras seeing harmony, even if your back pocket holds goggles and a respirator. This is political theater, not grassroots spontaneity. So yes, it starts sounding peaceful, but dig just a little deeper, and you find that this isn't just a protest safety guide. It's a coded operations manual for optics management, internal discipline, and narrative control. And that's only the first page. What comes next? It's anything but peaceful. Now we dive into the next section of the 50501 protest guide, titled Be Prepared. And this is where the mask of peaceful protest really starts to slip. What began with calls for nonviolence and humanity quickly transforms into something that looks more like tactical preparation for urban confrontation. This part of the guide reads less like a pamphlet and more like a military pre-deployment checklist, but designed for civilians blending into a street protest while being indistinguishable, unidentifiable, and in some cases, armored. The first line sets the tone. The more skin you cover, the less exposure you have to chemical irritants. On the surface, this might sound like a health tip, but in context, it's just the start of full-body concealment doctrine. Protesters are told to wear black from head to toe, a strategy used to form the now infamous black bloc aesthetic. The reason given? The more uniform everyone looks, the harder it is for officers to identify anyone from everyone else. No face, no case. That's not about peace. That's about tactical anonymity, and it's not accidental. It's deliberate. It's methodical. And yes, it is about evading legal consequences. There's even an edit acknowledging that in the current political climate, wearing all black could create bad optics, so they advise blending in with neutral colors until escalation happens, at which point the black uniform becomes necessary. That's key. It openly admits that escalation is a possibility, not ruled out, not condemned, and that the wardrobe should adapt when that moment comes. So now it's not just concealment. It's camouflage for a shifting environment. From there, the guide drills deep into identity masking. Don't wear unique clothing. Hide tattoos. Remove piercings. Wear sunglasses, tinted goggles, balaclavas, bandanas. Even reference to piqueteros, Argentine protesters known for militant street blockades. You're instructed to fully anonymize yourself to be indistinguishable from the crowd. Not so you can wave signs. So you can disappear into the mass. Melt away from kettling zones. Escape illegal arrest, their phrase, through costume changes. They even suggest wearing a colored layer under your black clothing, so you can strip and blend into civilian surroundings instantly, like a real-world version of a video game stealth mechanic. The instructions don't stop at identity concealment. They move on to chemical warfare defense. The guide warns to avoid makeup or lotion because tear gas will cling and burn. It tells protesters to wear swim goggles or lab goggles sealed with tape. This is not a spontaneous street march. This is protesters preparing for chemical weapons exposure and anticipating it. Then comes a protection against sonic weaponry. You read that right. The guide instructs protesters to bring earplugs, not for crowd noise, but because noise may be weaponized against you. That's a direct reference to RAD's long-range acoustic devices, which are used to disperse crowds with high-frequency sound. To counter it, the guide says to bring wet towels and even protest signs lined with aluminum foil. They go so far as to suggest using aluminum mesh screens as shields against microwave-based crowd control tech, again, explicitly specifying that it must be aluminum, not fiberglass. This is the language of countermeasures. Tactical readiness. You're told to bring a sturdy umbrella to deflect rubber bullets, a beach towel to soak up microwaves, a ballistic helmet rated NIJ level IA, the same used to stop handgun rounds. Not symbolic gear, not theatrical props, literal impact and projectile protection. And they don't stop there. They tell protesters to pad their dominant forearm, the part most likely to be used to shield from baton strikes. That advice isn't written for bystanders. It's for those who expect to engage, who expect to be struck, who are planning for it. There's even a tip to bring welding gloves to handle burning tear gas canisters, or use a traffic cone to trap the gas and contain the cloud, not avoid the gas, not flee the area, handle the canister, neutralize it. And amid all of this, they still wrap parts of it in public health language, like wearing a mask to avoid monkeypox or avian flu, to maintain plausible deniability. But the pattern is clear. This is not about staying safe during a peaceful rally. This is about being outfitted for urban conflict, while maintaining the visual of peaceful protest. It's about duality, be the ghost and the shield. Blend in when needed, armor up when needed, vanish when needed. This isn't just-in-case preparation. It's an operating manual for a new kind of warfare, a hybrid of protest and insurgency. And this is only the prep section. Wait until we cover what they're actually planning to do. In this next section of the 50501 Protest Guide, we move beyond gear and concealment into the realm of operational behavior. And this is where things become even more paradoxical. The tone, again, carefully balances legal caution with an undertone of radical coordination. It begins with one of the few hard boundaries they're willing to draw. Please do not bring guns to any demonstration. On the surface, that feels like common sense. Bringing firearms into a crowd can end tragically. Even the guide admits that even the most trained gunmen make mistakes. But the reasoning here isn't purely about safety or morality. It's strategic. They warn that the presence of guns could give antagonists, which can be interpreted as police, press, or political opponents, ammunition, no pun intended, to label the protest as a threat. And they admit point blank. In most states, it's probably illegal anyway. What this does is isolate lethal weapons as a line not to cross. Not because of ethics, but because of the risk to the movement's legal posture and optics. Then the guide pivots into a deeply sophisticated set of contingency planning steps, bordering on a kind of pre-operational checklist used in high-risk missions. Protesters are told to have multiple emergency contacts, including a civil rights attorney, a doctor, and a designated person to monitor their social media or alert others if they disappear. This is not typical event planning. This is war room prep for what they fully expect could become detainment, injury, or vanishment. It gets even more intense. They instruct protesters to handwrite their real name, birthday, social security number, allergies, medications, and diagnoses, and hide it somewhere safe, away from the protest site, with explicit instructions to burn it later. That's spycraft. That's fugitive procedure. That's not what peaceful assembly looks like. The paranoia continues, or, depending on your perspective, the realism. Protesters are told to write emergency contact numbers directly on their bodies with permanent marker. Why? Because phones might be confiscated, destroyed, or rendered useless. This isn't optional. It's survival protocol. And then comes the digital warfare section. Delete your biometrics. The guide says Face ID, fingerprint access, gone. Because under U.S. law, cops can't force you to give up a passcode, but they can physically force your face or finger onto a device. Protesters are told to switch their phones to airplane mode and to never connect to unfamiliar Wi-Fi networks, because law enforcement can deploy fake honeypot networks to infiltrate or track devices. They're even advised to download off-grid mesh communication apps like Bridgeify, which allow messaging without cellular data, the same tech used by dissidents during government shutdowns in authoritarian states. This is protest turned insurgency-level comms discipline. These aren't just kids with cardboard signs. This is a generation trained, informed, and intentionally obfuscating their footprints from both state surveillance and prosecution. Then, in what feels like a jarring tonal shift, the guide loops back around to old-school protest aesthetics. Bring signs. Bring art. Make your voice heard. But even this is presented with strategic framing. It's not just about expression. It's about curating a visual narrative for social media and video documentation. It's about steering the message in public perception, not just in the streets. Protesters are also encouraged to bring pamphlets outlining legal rights, plans to bail out arrested demonstrators, community resources, even resistance-related artivism. This isn't a march. It's a movement with brochures. And yet, even while recommending sharing snacks and being playful to lift morale, the guide keeps reminding you, be smart. Don't hinder movement. Don't block sightlines. Don't bring anything that might be used to justify force or escalate tension. You get the sense that every cheerful suggestion is wrapped in layers of operational awareness. Then we reach a surprising but telling note. Do not litter. And it's not about environmentalism. It's about optics. Trash in the streets? Bad optics. Hurts the movement. Opens it to criticism. This is not just a guide for survival. It's a handbook for perception management at scale. Finally, the guide lays down one more non-negotiable. Do not come to a protest expecting to GT intoxicated or party. This isn't Coachella. This is battlefield discipline. Substance use is not only dangerous, they warn, but irresponsible. Why? Because the area is swarming with officers, and you are responsible not just for your own safety, but for everyone else's. In other words, this is a collective effort with a zero-mistake policy. Taken together, this section of the guide shows us exactly what kind of operation this is. It's not random. It's not emotional. It's calculated. It's methodical. It borrows from activist tradition, yes, but it layers that with tactics used by insurgents, hackers, and underground networks. It prepares its readers not just to march, but to vanish, to counter, to adapt. And we're still not done. This is only the foundation. The next part? That's where we start to see exactly how far they're willing to take this. Now we've entered the final operational phase of the 50501 protest guide. Once you are there, this is the real-time playbook, the boots-on-the-ground checklist for navigating the protest zone. And it's here that the peaceful tone fully merges with paramilitary-level coordination, surveillance awareness, and even psychological warfare defense. The very first instruction? Form a crew, not go alone, not float through the crowd. You are to get friend, crew, or affinity group together, a phrase borrowed straight from direct action organizing circles. These are cells, small teams, micro-units operating within the broader protest mass. From the outset, this suggests the protest is not a spontaneous gathering of strangers. It's a swarm of coordinated actors with defined internal structures. You're told to exchange emergency contact info with your group members in case anyone is arrested or hurt, then to assign individual roles. That's right, roles. Everyone has a function. This isn't just show up and chant. It's a battlefield formation. One person watches a perimeter. One documents injuries. One live streams carefully. One monitors the group's mental state. One keeps time. This isn't theoretical. It's a protest turned into a mission. Next, tell someone who isn't going where you'll be when you'll check in and who to call if you don't. That's what a soldier tells their handler before deploying into uncertain territory. Then the guide repeats a mantra. Stay together. Stay calm. Panic is death. Mob confusion is vulnerability. You are instructed to pre-identify exit routes and safe meeting points. Know where the urgent care clinics and hospitals are. Learn how to spot volunteer medics in the field. These aren't platitudes. They're escape and triage planning for when, not if, things go sideways. From there, the tone becomes sharp. Stick with the crowd, they say, but not too tightly. Why? Because being surrounded by people offers protection. But crowd crush is a real danger. So maintain space, but don't get isolated. Never run. Running causes panic, and panic causes stampedes. You can see how much experience or post-mortem analysis went into writing this. This is the anatomy of chaos control. Then we reach what can only be described as a full-blown situational awareness protocol. You are told to remain vigilant at all times, constantly scanning for danger not only in the crowd, but around it. Side streets, rooftops, alleyways, and even the sky for drones. This is military-style surveillance awareness. Protesters are warned about projectiles, impaling hazards, rogue vehicles, and covert attackers. This is urban warfare terrain mapping. Never turn your back on a threat. The guide says, shield the fallen. If someone goes down, you are to use your body as a barrier against trampling or assault. These instructions aren't metaphorical. They are life-saving battlefield tactics, written by people who expect blood on the pavement. Next comes the media warfare. If someone is injured, do not photograph their face. Maintain their dignity, their safety, and their anonymity. If cameras are being used irresponsibly, spray paint them. Yes, that's in the guide. But then, ironically, you're told to photograph injuries with timestamps to build courtroom evidence. It's a balancing act between avoiding surveillance and collecting legal documentation. Again, this isn't just street protest. This is protest as a legal and media battlefield. And in that same breath, the guide explicitly warns, do not stream anyone's identity unless it's an officer. That's a very specific clause. Officers are fair game. Everyone else? Keep their face off the feed. Why? Because you could be the reason someone gets prosecuted. This is a protest culture where surveillance is both weapon and vulnerability, And controlling the footage means controlling the narrative. But the most paranoid, or perhaps realistic, section is next. The guide explicitly warns about disinformation and psychological warfare. They say agents will troll live streams, pose as protesters, create fake radio chatter, or spread misinformation in real time. They instruct protesters not to spread any information unless it is 100% verified, undeniable fact. Otherwise, you may accidentally sabotage the movement with fear and confusion. This is a stunning admission. They know they're in a psychological battlefield, and they're training participants to resist manipulation. This is counterintelligence awareness. And yes, they even address the infamous bait bricks. Pallets of bricks, they claim, may be strategically placed to entice protesters into throwing them and create the legal pretext for mass arrests or state violence. Do not take the bait. Do not touch them. Walk away. That alone suggests the organizers believe the protest is under constant manipulation from external forces, including potential false flag operations. To top it off, the guide goes full riot control countermeasures. Noise cannons, flashbangs, and concussive grenades all are listed as tools of disorientation. You're told to expect them, resist panic, and maintain clarity under pressure. And then it reiterates the earlier chemical defense advice. Tear gas canisters will burn your hands. Handle only with 100% cotton or welding gloves. Or trap the gas with a traffic cone. Then pour baking soda solution to the top. These aren't protest signs and chants anymore. These are counter-riot engineering solutions. This section, in total, is the final stage of a transformation. It began with calls for peace and signs and solidarity. But now, it's a manual for surviving direct contact with riot control forces, sustaining group cohesion under psychological attack, resisting infiltration, and documenting everything for later use in media or court. This is not a protest guide. It's an insurgent survival manual, wrapped in the language of peace, but hardened by the reality of confrontation. And the truly disturbing part? It's written with chilling clarity, because its authors have clearly seen this before. The next section of the 50501 Protest Guide deals with a moment that, by this point, seems almost assumed: the deployment of chemical irritants. This isn't framed as a hypothetical. It's treated as an inevitability. And the level of detail provided confirms that many of the people involved in writing this have experienced it firsthand. This isn't theory. It's survival protocol. It begins with a laser focus on ID contamination. You're told to rinse with clean water only, and the guide is explicit in rejecting popular myths about Maalox or milk, which were once widely shared among street protesters as supposed cures for tear gas. Those, the guide warns, can lead to infections, allergic reactions, or worse. Instead, it offers a more controlled alternative. Clean water, possibly mixed with a tiny amount of baby shampoo, but never soap. Especially not something harsh like Dawn, which can damage eye tissue. The advice is granular. Protesters are told to use plastic water bottles as makeshift flushing tools. An important note for anyone unable to bring formal eye wash kits. And just as importantly, it draws a line between rinsing eyes with clean water and treating skin, which is far more complicated. For skin exposure, plain water can actually make things worse. This is one of the more surprising but crucial details. Water can spread chemical agents across the skin and intensify the burning. So instead, the guide instructs protesters to prepare a 1-to-1 baking soda to water solution in advance, which helps neutralize irritants without spreading them. It's a subtle form of chemistry awareness, street-level biochemistry being distributed among activists in real time. Even milk, which is a last resort, gets scrutinized. Sure, it might soothe the burn, but it doesn't remove the irritants, and it poses significant risks: spoilage bacteria and deadly dairy allergies. If it's used at all, the guide says you'd better ask the person first. Then it urges something most guides never mention: educate yourself before you get gassed. It provides a direct link to a popular science article. Again, not radical propaganda, but a mainstream scientific resource that explains how chemical weapons work and how to decontaminate properly. That shows this movement doesn't just want protesters to show up. They want them trained, informed, and functionally resilient against police tactics that are, by international standards, chemical warfare. They even get into respiratory guidance. If you're near gas clouds, do not run. Why? Because running increases your breathing rate, forcing deeper inhalation of tear gas into your lungs. It also causes sweat, which causes irritants to cling to your skin and burn more deeply. Instead, they recommend staying calm, keeping a wet cloth over your mouth, and maintaining composure, a counterintuitive, disciplined reaction in the face of chaos. That isn't instinctual. That's conditioned behavior, passed down through organized messaging. What this section reveals is that this movement understands the battlefield. They know the tools being used against them, and they've created decentralized, scientifically informed countermeasures, not just to survive, but to deny their opponents the ability to break their formation. This isn't a guide for chanting. It's a chemical warfare defense manual written for civilians, and it exposes a hard truth. The protesters expect to be treated like enemy combatants, and they prepared accordingly. Now we enter one of the most revealing and radical parts of the 50501 protest guide, the section titled Regarding Arrests. And this is where the tone becomes unmistakably confrontational. Up until now, the guide has walked a delicate line between self-preservation and protest management. But here, it moves beyond mere defense and starts actively instructing protesters to intervene against law enforcement. Not legally, physically. It opens with a striking line. Protesters rely on each other for protection by intervening physically against arrests and police violence. Not documenting. Not filing complaints. Not providing witness accounts. Intervening physically. That is a direct call for crowd members to interpose themselves between officers and the person being detained, a tactic that escalates tension and risks further arrests or violence. It's not subtle. It's not coded. It's a green light for direct interference with law enforcement under the banner of solidarity. The guide then warned protesters to watch out for officers pulling people from the crowd. This instruction is less about awareness and more about counteraction. The implication is that any extraction attempt, even a lawful arrest, should be treated as a threat. The crowd is being trained to look for police engagement and respond in kind. And how should they respond? Record any interactions with police. That's standard in activist circles. But the tone here is different. It's not about keeping officers accountable through institutional channels. It's about gathering evidence for defense or retaliation. The camera becomes a weapon in the information war. Everything is documented, not just for court, but for broadcast. Then comes one of the most hardline rules in the guide. Do not tell officials anything. Not a word. Not even small talk. Not even your breakfast. It repeats the classic legal advice of, I choose to remain silent, or I want a lawyer, but then pushes it further with an almost gangland slogan. Everybody walks when nobody talks. That's not legal counsel. That's a code of silence, rooted in militant subculture. It reinforces the idea that solidarity is absolute, and that any cooperation with law enforcement, even accidentally, is betrayal. It's the kind of line you'd expect in a prison manual, not a protest guide. The final point in this section brings it all home. Never let any demonstrator get arrested alone. That's not poetic rhetoric. That's literal. Protesters are told to cross police lines, or even sit in the middle of the street to remain with someone being detained. It openly admits this might be illegal, but reassures readers that a lawyer will help make that call for you in court. This is no longer about avoiding arrest. This is about challenging the very legitimacy of arrest. It transforms a legal consequence into a tactical point of resistance. This section exposes how far the guide goes to foster an internal code, a set of behaviors, ethics, and street-level laws that supersede the official ones. It's not just about keeping people safe. It's about building a protest culture that is self-reliant, hostile to law enforcement authority, and trained to resist, not just symbolically, but physically. In other words, this guide is not simply for staying safe during a protest. It's about building a movement that refuses to allow arrests to occur quietly. It transforms bystanders into defenders. It rewrites the script from observe and report to intervene and obstruct. And in doing so, it cements the most important operational principle in this guide. The system is the enemy, and your loyalty is to the crowd. And now we've come to the final section of the 50501 protest guide. The part that kicks in after the smoke clears, the crowd disperses, and the headlines fade. But make no mistake, this is not the end. This is the beginning of the next phase. Because the guide treats protest not as a single event, but as a cycle of mobilization, escalation, fallout, and reactivation. It begins with what sounds like a simple act of compassion. Everyone who is able to has a duty to visit local jails and stand in solidarity with arrested protesters. But in practice, this is something far more calculated. It's a public show of force, a ritual of presence designed to put pressure on police, courts, and local institutions. They aren't just supporting their arrested, they're monitoring the process, broadcasting it, refusing to let the system operate in darkness. This is strategic post-action presence, and it sends a message. We're watching, and we're not going away. And it doesn't matter who got arrested. The guide emphasizes that the solidarity is universal. No matter their gender, sexual identity, race, creed, religion, political affiliation, that line alone is telling, because it implies this movement is bigger than any single cause. It's trying to forge a meta coalition, uniting anarchists, liberals, communists, radicals, and disillusioned centrists under one operational framework. In other words, it's trying to become a post-ideological insurgency, where identity differences are set aside for shared goal, resisting the system. Then, almost suddenly, the tone shifts to something intimate. Check in with the medics. This is one of the few times the guide steps out of tactics and leans into human emotion. It acknowledges what everyone else forgets. Medics often give everything and ask for nothing. The guide reminds protesters that these people have carried trauma, made impossible choices, and probably neglected their own health during the crisis. Post-protest triage isn't just for the wounded, it's for the healers. And this moment of reflection is one of the guide's most human and most powerful elements. Then the guide drops a bold line. This IS non-sectarian defense, in all caps with triple exclamation marks. This is a rallying cry, a mission statement. The message is clear. This isn't about factions anymore. It's about defense, period. You don't have to agree on every issue. You just have to agree to defend each other in the street. That phrase, non-sectarian defense, is the heartbeat of the guide's vision. A movement made not of like minds, but shared enemies. It finishes with a vow of loyalty. We will have each other's backs as we take America back. That's not peaceful rhetoric. That's revolutionary rhetoric. It reframes protest as a struggle for national ownership, casting protesters not as dissidents, but as the rightful inheritors of America. And the word back implies they once had it, lost it, and are now prepared to fight to reclaim it. In the streets, in the courts, in every confrontation to come. Then, as a kind of postscript, the guide links out to an entire ecosystem of resources, and these links are just as telling as the instructions themselves. It offers connections to Beautiful Trouble, a hub of activist tactics, resistance theory, and protest philosophy, effectively a digital insurgency handbook. The ACLU's Protest Rights Guide, grounding their resistance in constitutional legitimacy, offering legal cover for radical action. A legal breakdown of what police can arrest you for at a protest, so you know exactly how far you can push. A YouTube video on LR80 defense, because yes, this guide anticipates sonic warfare. A technical document written by engineers breaking down how LR80 devices work, because this movement doesn't just fight back emotionally, it fights back scientifically. All of this shows the multi-layered nature of the guide. It is not just a how-to. It is a blueprint for movement infrastructure. Psychological, legal, tactical, medical, propaganda, defense. This final section is the part where they say, we don't disappear when protest ends. We regroup, recharge, and re-strategize. And that's the real takeaway from this video. The 50501 protest guide starts like a safety sheet and ends as a decentralized, adaptable playbook for insurgent action in modern America. From dressing in layers to street medic triage, from digital counter-surveillance to jail solidarity, this document shows a level of organization, foresight, and psychological discipline that most people would never expect from what they think is a peaceful protest movement. But if you read between the lines, this guide isn't just preparing you for a protest. It's preparing you for a war.